Harvey got he said, well, you can't do it. I have a contract. I said, I can break that contract because I'll just say that you were really rude to the guests and you're difficult to work with and stuff. And other people can be witness to this.
October 27th, 1973. Carol Burnett literally fires Harvey Korman in a hallway while props crash around them. Harvey had been ignoring Tim Conway's ad-libs during a massive personal crisis, and Carol finally snapped. But get this, Harvey Korman begged for his job back just days later. Did he get it? We're unpacking that legendary door slam that saved her show and the 5 men she truly banned for life. Stick around, because, as it turns out, that hallway echo masked 7 years of boiling tension. Door slam betrayal, October 27, 1973. Harvey Korman is earning $25,000 per episode to be the backbone of the Carol Burnett Show. And he's about to throw it all away over a door. Here's the thing about variety television in the early 70s. You lived and died by timing. Not just comedic timing, but the literal clock on the wall. Network slots were sacred. Sponsors bought specific minutes, and every second of airtime had been negotiated by lawyers in rooms Korman would never see. So when Tim Conway started breaking character, stretching a simple dentist sketch into 4 minutes of pure improvised chaos, the control booth was already sweating. Think about the legendary Elephant Story or the dentist sketch. According to production notes, Tim Conway would often hide his best jokes from the writers and even Carol herself until the tape was rolling. He'd wait for the red light to go on before unleashing a 5-minute tangent, just to see Harvey's face turn red from holding back a laugh. Normally, that was the secret sauce of the show. But on that day in October, it was the spark that hit a powder keg of Harvey's built-up resentment. Conway would do this thing where he'd catch Korman off guard with some bizarre physical bit, a twitch or a stutter that wasn't in the script, and then he'd just hold it. Hold it while the audience screamed with laughter, hold it while the cameras kept rolling, and hold it while Korman was supposed to stay in character and react as the straight man. It was comedy gold, absolutely. But it was also professional torture if you were the guy expected to keep the scene grounded. Now here's where it gets interesting. Korman wasn't just annoyed by the ad-libs. He was cracking apart. According to multiple archival interviews, his marriage was imploding in real life. His wife had issued ultimatums that had nothing to do with television, and he was bringing every ounce of that personal devastation onto the CBS soundstage. The crew could see it. He'd snap at stagehands over nothing, miss cues he'd hit perfectly for 6 seasons, and stare blankly during rehearsals like his mind was still in some divorce attorney's office. But October 27th was different. Conway went off script again, this time during a live-to-tape segment, and Korman simply stopped. Just completely stopped reacting. He stood there frozen while Conway kept improvising around him, and the silence was absolutely deafening. No laugh track could save it. The bit died, the energy drained from the room, and Burnett watched her show flatline in front of a studio audience that had paid to see magic. She found him in the hallway afterward. Props were still being wheeled past from the sketch, with crew members scattering like they could smell the storm coming. And Korman, this man she'd built an empire with, didn't apologize, didn't explain. He just slammed the door between them so hard that the framed photos on the hallway walls rattled, and a prop vase actually fell off a shelf and shattered on the linoleum. Burnett fired him on the spot. Not tomorrow, not after talking to producers. Right there, with ceramic shards still scattered across the floor, she told him he was done. "Never again," she said. She'd built this show on loyalty and trust, and he'd just shattered both against her wall. But get this, the argument wasn't just about a missed cue. According to Carol's own memoir, In Such Good Company, she walked into that hallway specifically to defend her guest star, Petula Clark. Harvey had been reportedly treating Clark with such visible coldness that the atmosphere was toxic. When Carol asked him to be more professional, Harvey didn't back down. He looked the woman whose name was on the marquee in the eye and told her to mind her own business. That was the spark. Carol immediately reminded him that since her name was on the show, it was very much her business. That's the exact moment the hallway went silent and the door slammed. And honestly, the crew didn't blame her. According to production staff who spoke years later, they'd been placing bets for weeks about when she'd finally snap, and now here it was. The great Harvey Korman banished from the kingdom. Some of them literally put cash on whether he'd even show up for the next taping, writing him off as finished, a casualty of his own ego and personal chaos. But wait, here's what nobody in that hallway knew. According to Korman's own accounts in later interviews, his wife had threatened divorce that very morning, a final ultimatum delivered over cold coffee in their kitchen, and he'd walked onto that set carrying more weight than any sketch could hold. The door slam wasn't about Burnett. It was about a man who'd reached his absolute limit and chose the wrong place to break. 5 days later, he was back. Not because Burnett forgave him. She didn't. Not really. He begged. Actually, got on his knees in her dressing room and begged to return, explaining the divorce threat, the breakdown, and the complete loss of perspective. And Burnett, this woman who'd grown up watching her own mother struggle with alcohol and abandonment, who knew exactly what desperation looked like, made a calculation that had nothing to do with mercy. She rehired him because firing your lead-straight man mid-season is ratings self-harm, because audiences loved their chemistry even when it was strained, because the show was bigger than her pride, bigger than that shattered vase in the hallway. The crew who'd bet against him lost their money, and Korman returned to the soundstage with his tail between his legs, suddenly very willing to play along with whatever Conway threw at him. And get this, according to Nielsen ratings data from that period, the ratings actually soared after the incident. Viewers could sense the tension somehow, that electric edge between performers who'd been through something real and come out the other side. It became part of the show's mythology, this unspoken knowledge that what you were watching wasn't just polished variety television, but actual humans negotiating their fractures in real time. Can you rehire someone who slammed your door? Because here's the uncomfortable truth about that October hallway. Burnett didn't choose grace. She chose the show. She calculated the cost of replacing Korman, weighed it against the cost of swallowing her pride, and picked the option that kept her empire running. Tactical loyalty, not emotional forgiveness. The door got repaired, the vase got replaced, and Korman got exactly one chance to prove he wouldn't break again. But that calculation, that cold-eyed assessment of what she could and couldn't afford to lose, it became her signature. And while Korman got his grace period, burning through his one mistake like a get-out-of-jail-free card, the next 4 men who tested her boundaries wouldn't be so lucky. The 5 men she shut out. Now that we know Carol Burnett rehires Harvey Korman, you might think she's a soft touch. You might think she's the kind of boss who lets everything slide as long as the audience is laughing. But that is exactly where the legend of the funny lady starts to shift into the reality of a Hollywood titan. Carol is 92 years old now, and she has a memory like a steel trap. She isn't just a comedian. She is a survivor of the most cutthroat era of television history. When she looks back at her career, she doesn't just see a collection of sketches and Emmy Awards. She sees a list of names. Specifically, she names 5 men who crossed her lines so completely that she effectively shut them out of her professional life. Here is the thing about that list. Most people see the clickbait headlines about hate and assume it is all about petty feuds. But according to her own reflections in various retrospectives, including the deep dive interviews on her official legacy channels, it isn't about hate at all. It is about boundaries. In the 1970s, the television industry was a brutal, male-dominated machine. If you are a woman with your name on the show, you aren't just the star. You are a target for every producer, agent, and executive who thinks they can own your vision. The first man on that list is, ironically, Harvey Korman. Now, wait, I know what you're thinking. We just spent an entire chapter talking about how she rehired him. And that's true. But in the grand tally of her life, Harvey stays on that list because he represents the first time she had to face an ego-fueled meltdown from someone she considered family. He is at the bottom of the list because he is the only one who actually earns his way back. But according to the crew members who were there in 1973, that forgiveness is selective. It is a tactical decision. She realizes that Harvey's ego is a byproduct of his personal crisis, not a deliberate attempt to steal the show from her. He is forgiven, but he is also the blueprint for how she handles everyone else. After 1973, she developed a zero-tolerance policy for boundary crossers. Now we get into the men she truly saves her venom for. The second and third names on the list aren't actors, they are the suits. These are the producers who, according to industry reports and her own accounts of the Gary Moore Show era, try to commit creative theft. Think about the audacity of that for a second. You have a woman who is literally reinventing the variety show format. And you have men in back offices trying to dictate what is funny and who gets the credit. Carol learns very early on that if you give an inch to a producer who wants to tweak your instinct, they will eventually take the whole mile. She shuts these men out permanently because they represent a threat to the integrity of the work itself. For Carol, the show is sacred. If you try to own her vision, you are out. No apologies, no second chances, no rehires. Then there is the fourth man, and this one is complicated because it hits so close to home. We are talking about her ex-husband, Joe Hamilton. Now, Joe isn't just her husband, he is the producer of the show. He is the man who helps build the empire. But as the marriage starts to dissolve under the weight of the industry and personal struggles, the professional overlap becomes toxic. According to the archival footage and biographies covering the late 70s, their relationship becomes a case study in why you don't mix high-stakes business with a crumbling marriage. When the split finally happens, it isn't just a divorce. It is a professional blackout. She has to disentangle her entire career from the man who helped start it. It is a survival move. She realizes that to keep the Carol Burnett brand alive, she has to shut him out of the workspace entirely. It is a heartbreaking reality, but it is an undeniable truth of how she has kept her show on the air for 11 years. The fifth man is perhaps the most surprising because he is a power player, a high-level executive who, according to various Hollywood historians, tried to bully her during contract negotiations. This is a man who thinks he can use his position at the network to squeeze her. He assumes that because she plays the clown on screen, she doesn't understand the mechanics of the business. But get this, Carol isn't just reading scripts. She is reading the room. She realizes that this man's disrespect isn't just personal, it is systemic. By shutting him out and refusing to work with his associates, she sends a message to the entire network. The funny lady has teeth. And when we talk about Carol shutting out the suits, we aren't just talking about office politics. We're talking about actual combat. According to California court records from 1981, Carol took on the ultimate suit, the legal team of the National Enquirer. They had published a story claiming she was boisterous and drunk in a restaurant, which was a total fabrication. While other stars would have ignored it, Carol spent years and a fortune in legal fees to prove a point. She won a landmark libel case, proving that her boundary setting wasn't just limited to her soundstage. She was willing to blackball anyone in the entire industry who tried to profit off a lie about her character. So, when you see those headlines saying Carol Burnett hates these men, you have to look deeper. According to the context provided in her 2024 retrospective interviews, her list is actually a survival playbook. She isn't acting out of spite. She is enforcing a boundary pivot that she started back in that hallway in 1973. She learns that in the 1970s on TV, you can't just be talented, you have to be a fortress. She lists Harvey Korman low on the list because his offense was emotional, but her real venom is saved for the men who tried to own her. She turns those wounds into a form of control that literally outlasts all of them. Think about that for a second. How many women in that era could say they survived 11 years on a major network while firing producers and agents who didn't show respect? It is a staggering achievement. She isn't just a comedian who made it big. She is a CEO who protected her assets. And get this, she does it all while remaining the most beloved person in the building. It shows you exactly who she is. She is a woman who knows when to forgive a friend like Harvey and when to lock the door forever on a suit who thinks he's in charge. Here is the thing, though. Forgiving Harvey Korman and managing the suits hid some very deep scars. Scars that weren't always visible in the sketches or the laughter. In 1977, there was an episode that was almost too raw to revisit. It is a moment where the comedy stops and the reality of her personal life leaks onto the screen in an absolutely haunting way. It is an episode that Carol herself rarely talks about, because it contains an echo of her divorce that almost broke her right in front of the cameras. What exactly happened in that 1977 taping? And how did she manage to keep the show together while her personal world was literally falling apart? The 1977 episode that broke her. The cameras were still rolling when it happened. Carol Burnett had just finished the final take of a sketch about a woman signing divorce papers, and the studio audience was giving her a standing ovation. But here's what the viewers at home never saw. The moment the director yelled, "Cut," Carol walked straight off the set, found a quiet corner backstage, and completely fell apart. The crew, these tough television veterans who'd seen everything, were crying too. Not the polite tears you get at a sad movie. These were the kind of tears that come when you realize you've just watched someone pour their actual soul onto television. Now, let's back up a second. It's 1977, and Carol Burnett is in the middle of what should be the happiest period of her life. Her show is absolutely dominating Saturday nights. She's won Emmys. She's making television history as the first woman to host her own variety show and actually run the whole operation. But behind those famous ear tugs and the chaotic energy of the Carol Burnett show, something brutal was happening in her personal life. She was fresh off a divorce from Joe Hamilton, her producer and the father of her 3 daughters. And I'm not talking about a clean, Hollywood-style conscious uncoupling. This was messy. This was the kind of divorce where you discover things about someone you thought you knew, things that make you question every memory you ever shared. Joe had been unfaithful. The betrayal cut deep, and suddenly, Carol wasn't just a comedian anymore. She was a single mother, a woman in her mid-40s starting over, and someone carrying around a heart that felt like it had been put through a shredder. So when the writers brought her this sketch about a woman finalizing her divorce, something in Carol should have said no. Any sane person would have passed. But Carol Burnett has never been accused of being sane in the way that matters for art. She said yes. She read those lines about a marriage ending, about the paperwork that makes it official, about the strange mix of grief and relief that comes with closing that door forever. And she recognized every single word of it. We're talking specifically about the episode that aired on October 15, 1977. According to the show's production logs, this was a segment of The Family, the recurring sketch that eventually became Mama's Family. In this specific taping, Carol's character, Eunice, is dealing with the wreckage of a divorce. Here is the thing. Carol was going through her real-life separation from Joe Hamilton at that exact moment. When she sat at that kitchen table on set, she wasn't just Eunice. She was a woman whose actual 14-year marriage was ending in the same building where she was expected to be funny. It's why that footage feels so heavy. It wasn't a script, it was a documentary of her own grief. Here's where it gets interesting. Harvey Korman, her longtime co-star, who was going through his own personal struggles at the time, played opposite her in that sketch. And you can see it if you watch the footage today. The way they look at each other isn't acting. Those are two people who genuinely understand loss, who've both been through the ringer, finding something real in the middle of a comedy show. The sketch wasn't played for laughs, it was played for keeps, and that's exactly what made it devastating. The audience that night didn't know about Carol's divorce. They didn't know she was barely holding it together. They just knew that something about that sketch felt different, felt important. When it ended, they stood up. They applauded for what felt like forever. And the critics agreed. It won awards. Emmy voters absolutely ate it up. Television historians still point to it as one of the finest dramatic moments in variety show history. But here's the thing nobody talks about. Carol Burnett has never, not once, allowed that sketch to be replayed in any retrospective, any anniversary special, or any compilation of her greatest hits. When producers ask about including it, she shuts the conversation down immediately. That episode, that moment, that piece of television that everyone else considers a triumph, for her, it's off limits. It's too close. It's too real. It's the moment when professional pain became so personal that even decades later, she can't watch it without feeling everything all over again. And that brings up something worth sitting with for a second. We talk about actors using their personal pain for their art like it's this noble, beautiful thing. But we don't often talk about the cost. Carol gave millions of viewers something unforgettable that night. She turned her actual heartbreak into art that people still remember nearly 50 years later. But she also gave away a piece of herself that she can never get back. Every time someone praises that sketch, she's reminded of exactly where she was emotionally when she performed it. The applause must sound strange when you know what it actually costs. There's a question that lingers over all of this, and it does not have an easy answer. When does professional pain become too real for prime time? Carol found the line, crossed it, delivered something extraordinary, and has spent the rest of her life making sure she never has to look at that crossing again. The resilience it took to get through that taping, to finish the season, to keep showing up week after week with that fresh wound still bleeding, that's the part of her story that doesn't get enough attention. Because here's what that rawness in 1977 really was. It wasn't random. It wasn't just a tough day at the office. That willingness to go to those depths, to risk that much of herself for the work, came from the same place that made Carol Burnett lock her dressing room door back in 1967 and demand to be taken seriously as a boss. She'd learned that her voice mattered, that her instincts were worth following, even when they led her into territory that hurt. That locked door legacy, the one that turned her into television's first female powerhouse producer, also gave her the confidence to say yes to a sketch that would break her open on national television. Legacy of Locked Doors. Here is the thing about Carol Burnett. She didn't just survive the cutthroat 1970s television industry. She basically rewrote its DNA by knowing exactly when to slam the door and when to leave it ajar. When we look at her legacy today, we see the 25 Emmy Awards and the standing ovations, but we often miss the mechanical truth of how she actually got there. She built that empire on a foundation of locked doors. After that 1973 hallway explosion with Harvey Korman, her ratings didn't just stay steady, they actually peaked. According to industry analysis from the time, the show gained a sharper, more disciplined edge because the boss had finally drawn a line in the sand. Carol realized that those slams, those moments where she had to cut people out, weren't signs of a breakdown. They were her masterstroke. Think about the environment she is working in during this era. This is a world where men in suits are expected to own the vision of every woman on screen. According to her own accounts in retrospectives, like the ones found on the Carol Burnett Show official archive, she decided that she was the only one who got to hold the keys to her kingdom. She turned the act of exiling threats into a professional art form. It is an uncomfortable truth, but her empire actually thrived on those exits. Every time she shut out a producer who tried to squeeze her or an executive who tried to bully her, the show got better. It became more Carol and less of a corporate product. Now, here is where it gets really interesting. Harvey Korman's rehire stands out as this rare, beautiful exception to his rule. It was a great tactic, plain and simple. According to her biographer and various crew interviews, Carol knew that Harvey's meltdown was a human error, a byproduct of personal pain, not a calculated power grab. By bringing him back, she secured the absolute loyalty of her most important comedic partner, while simultaneously proving to the suits that she was the one who decided who stayed and who went. She forgave the fixable and exiled the threats. That distinction is exactly why she outlived almost every other variety show of that era. And to get this, the strategy worked better than anyone could have predicted. While other shows were falling apart because of internal power struggles, Carol's set became a fortress of creative safety. According to the Emmys historical database, her show didn't just win for acting, it won for writing, directing, and overall variety excellence year after year. Those 25 Emmys didn't come from a place of playing nice. They came from a woman who understood that to be a pioneer in a male-dominated TV world, you have to be willing to burn the bridge if the person on it is trying to take your wheel. Most people look at the door slam and wonder if it was just a moment of feminine rage. But when you look at those awards sitting on her shelf, you realize it was actually a moment of revelation. It exposed the industry's rot and showed Carol that she had to be the fortress. She didn't just win awards, she won autonomy. According to archives from CBS, she became one of the first women to have that level of final cut authority, and she used it to protect her crew and her vision with a zero-tolerance policy that became legendary in Hollywood. It wasn't about being mean, it was about being the guardian of the work. Think about that for a second. Every legend has a moment that defines it. For some, it is a big speech or a hit movie. For Carol, it was a hallway in 1973 where she realized that her name on the door meant she owned the hinges. It makes you wonder, Did that door slam save her soul, or did it scar it deeper by forcing her to become so guarded against the world? I genuinely want to know your take on this because it's a fine line to walk. Did the door slam save her soul or scar it deeper? Here is the thing to remember as we wrap this up. Carol Burnett is 92 years old now, and she is still the gold standard for how to run a creative business. She proved that you can be the funny lady and the iron boss at the same time without losing your soul. The fact that we are still talking about a hallway argument from 50 years ago shows just how much power she actually wielded. She outlived the betrayers, outproduced the suits, and outlasted every single person who thought they could own her. That one exception with Harvey Korman, it didn't prove she was soft. It actually proved she was unbreakable. It was the one rule break that allowed the rest of her boundaries to stay standing for decades. One exception proved the rule that built her unbreakable. It shows you that in Hollywood and in life, knowing who to forgive is just as important as knowing who to lock out forever. Carol Burnett turned a hallway door slam into a blueprint for a 25 Emmy empire. She knew exactly when to offer grace to a friend like Korman and when to permanently exile the suits who tried to own her vision. She won by slamming doors others feared to touch. Which band shocked you the most?